The woman behind the counter did not say a word. She slid a blank deposit slip across the laminate, folded once, and kept her eyes on her screen while she did it. The counter was cold under my wrists. There was a pen on a little steel chain beside my hand, and I remember thinking how strange it was that a bank would still chain down a pen in a building where my daughter had just tried to take $186,000 away from me. I did not open the slip right away. I put it in my coat pocket, the way you put away something you already know is going to hurt. Maybe you know that feeling. The one where a stranger is kinder to you in 10 seconds than your own child has been in 2 years. 19 days later, in a small room at the back of that same branch, my daughter would be asked to explain a signature. She had signed her own name to a form she had not read carefully. I had signed mine to a card in 1998, and I had read that one very carefully indeed. My name is Raymond Holloway. I am 71 years old. I spent 41 years as a bookbinder, and I want to tell you what happens when a man who spent his whole life handling paper meets a family who never learned to read it. I should start with Eleanor, because everything I own started with Eleanor. We met at the bindery in Corbin Falls in 1974. She worked the folding machine on the second floor, and I worked the sewing frames on the first. And for 8 months, the only thing I knew about her was the sound of her machine stopping at exactly 3:10 every afternoon, which is when she took her break. I started taking mine at 3:10 as well. That was my entire strategy. It took 8 months and it worked. We were married for 46 years. She died 3 years ago in March, at home, in the front room, with the light coming through the window the way she liked it. I was holding her hand. I have never told anybody what she said last, because it was not for anybody else. After she was gone, I did the thing that people do. I put my affairs in order. I am not a wealthy man. I have a house that I own outright, bought in 1994, with money we saved $1 at a time, and I have one savings account at Ridgemont Savings and Trust on Delacourt Street. That account held $186,000. I want to be very clear about what that money was for, because it matters more than any other fact in this story. It was not an inheritance. It was not a nest egg. It was not for a cruise or a car or a rainy day. That money was there so that when I got old, properly old, the kind of old where you cannot manage the stairs and you forget which day the bins go out, nobody would ever have to sit around a kitchen table and decide what to do with me. I had watched Eleanor's mother go through that. 3 of her children in a kitchen, arguing about her like she was a piece of furniture that had become inconvenient. She was in the next room. She could hear all of it. I promised myself that would never happen in my house. $186,000 buys a lot of years of somebody coming in to help. It buys the right to stay in your own front room, in your own chair, with the light coming through the window the way you like it. That was the entire purpose of that money, to make sure that no one ever had to decide for me. I want you to hold on to that, because of what my daughter did with it. I opened that account on the 11th of June, 1998, after Eleanor's mother passed, and a small amount came to us. I remember the day because it was raining hard enough that I had to stand in the doorway and shake out my coat before I went to the desk. A young clerk named Mr. Pettigrew took me through it. He had a mustache he was clearly very proud of. He put a card in front of me. Heavy stock, about 4 inches by 6, printed in 2 colors. I noticed the stock because that is what I did for a living. I could tell you the weight of a sheet of paper by the sound it made when you dropped it on a table. This was a good card. Cotton content. Meant to last. There was a box on that card, and above the box it said, in small type, Sole Signatory. Mr. Pettigrew asked if I wanted to add Eleanor. I said no, and I will tell you why. Eleanor and I had everything else together. The house, the checking, the car, the whole life. But she had a sister who borrowed money and never paid it back. And Eleanor could not say no to her. Not ever. Eleanor herself asked me to keep this one separate. She said, "Keep one door I cannot open, Ray, or I will open it." So I ticked the box. Sole signatory, Raymond A. Holloway, in my own hand, with a fountain pen I had carried since my apprenticeship, and Mr. Pettigrew blotted it and filed it, and I forgot about it for 28 years. Now I need to tell you about the second thing, and I need to tell it plainly, because it is the thing that gave my daughter the idea. 2 years ago I had a bad winter. Nothing dramatic. A chest infection that would not clear. 6 weeks of feeling like a wrung-out cloth. My daughter Diane came by more often, which I was grateful for, and one afternoon in February she sat at my kitchen table with a coffee and said, "Dad, you should let me be on the checking account, just for deposits, just so if you are laid up, I can put your pension in for you and pay the gas bill." That is a reasonable thing for a daughter to say. I said yes. We drove down to Delacourt Street, and a young man added her to the checking account as an authorized user, deposits and bill payments only. It took 11 minutes. She was very organized about it. She had brought a folder. The savings account was not mentioned. It was a different account, opened 24 years earlier, under a different card, with a different signature. Diane believed that folder made her the person in charge of my money. It did not, but she believed it, and belief is a powerful thing in a person who has already decided what she wants. The first time I understood something had changed was at a dinner in September. Diane and her husband Curtis had us all at their house, me, their son Theo, who is 19 and at the community college, and Curtis's mother. Curtis sells commercial insurance and has a way of talking about money that makes you feel like you are already behind on a payment. He had had a bad year. I knew that because Theo had told me, not because Curtis had. Halfway through the meal, Diane said, "Dad was telling me the other day he thought the property tax was due in November." I said, "It is due in November." She said, "No, Dad, it is October." And she looked around the table with a small, tight smile, the way you do when you are apologizing for someone. "It is November. It has been November for 32 years. I did not argue, because arguing is exactly what she was waiting for. I said, "Well, you might be right," and I ate my dinner. Curtis said, "This is what we were saying, Ray. Things get away from a person. There is no shame in it." Then Diane said, "I think it is time we got your affairs properly organized." I said, "They are organized." She said, "Are they though?" and reached over and put her hand on top of mine, the way you would with a child who was reaching for something hot. Before I left that night, she asked for my checkbook. "Just to sort out," she said. Just to get on top of it. I gave it to her because it was easier than the alternative, and because part of me, I will be honest with you, part of me wanted to believe she was only trying to help. Theo walked me to my car. He is a quiet boy, tall, hands he has not grown into yet. At the car he said, "Grandad." Then he stopped, and then he said, "It is November. I know it is November." He did not say anything else, but he had said it, and I heard it. I drove home the long way. The second thing was the doctor. In October, I got a letter confirming an appointment at Dr. Aurelio's office that I had not made. When I called, they said my daughter had scheduled it and had listed herself as my contact. I went. I did not tell her I was going, and I did not tell her I had asked for a copy of what had been said. Dr. Aurelio is a decent woman. She has looked after me for 11 years. She was careful about how she put it. She said, "Raymond, your daughter called and said she has been noticing some forgetfulness, leaving the stove on, getting confused about dates." I said, "Which stove?" She said, "I am only telling you what was reported. I have an electric hob with an automatic shut-off. It has had one since 2019. It cannot be left on. It turns itself off after 15 minutes whether you want it to or not, and it is a source of considerable irritation to me when I am making stock." Dr. Aurelio ran me through the screening anyway, because that is her job. Count backwards from 100 by 7s, name these 3 objects, and name them again in 5 minutes. Draw a clock face showing 10 past 3. I drew the clock, 3:10. I did not tell her why my hand knew that time so well. She wrote in the file that I presented with no cognitive impairment. She gave me a copy when I asked. I put it in the drawer in the hall table, under the tape measure, and I remember thinking that I did not know yet why I wanted it, only that I did. Then in November my post started arriving late, and some of it stopped arriving at all. It took me 2 weeks and a trip to the sorting office to learn that a mail forwarding request had been submitted for my address, redirecting certain items to a post office box in Curtis's name. I stood in that sorting office with my hat in my hand, and I understood, finally, that this was not a daughter who was worried about her father. This was a daughter who was building a file. The last day of it was the 9th of December, and it happened in about 4 minutes. I went into Ridgemont on Delacourt Street to withdraw $6,000. The furnace had gone. Not limping. Gone. Cracked heat exchanger. 41 years old. The same age as my career. The man who came out said he could have a new one in by Thursday if I could pay on the day. So I went to the bank. I had been going into that branch for 28 years. I know the marble in the entrance, and I know the door sticks in wet weather, and I know that if you go at 10:30 on a Tuesday, there is no queue. I filled out the slip. 6,000. I signed it with the same pen. The teller was a young woman I had seen before but never spoken to. Dark hair pinned up, a small silver pin on her collar shaped like a bird. She took my slip and she typed, and then she stopped typing. She said, "Mr. Holloway, I am not able to complete this today." I said, "Is there a hold on the funds?" She said, "The account is under review." I said, "Under review for what?" And she looked at me, really looked at me, for about 2 seconds, and I watched a decision happen behind her eyes. She said, "I am not able to discuss the details of a review with you." I said, "It is my account." She said, "I understand that, sir." And I stood there, 71 years old, 41 years of work, my own money on the other side of an inch of glass, and a young woman telling me she was not able to discuss my own account with me. I did not raise my voice. I want to be clear about that. I have never once in my life found that raising my voice improved a situation. I said thank you, and I picked up my hat. That is when she slid the deposit slip across the counter, folded once, eyes on her screen. I did not open it until I was in the car. She had written it in pencil, small and fast, on the back of a blank slip. Ask for a copy of what was filed on your account. Ask today. Form 1140cc. That was all. No name. No signature. I sat in the car park with the engine off for a long time. Here is what I felt, and it may not be what you expect. I did not feel rage. I have been angry perhaps 4 times in my life, and it has never once been useful. What I felt was tired. And underneath the tired, something very cold and very clear, like the bottom of a well. She had gone to my bank and told them I could not think. She had done it to reach money whose entire purpose was to make sure that nobody would ever have to make a decision about me. She had used my own dignity as the tool to take away the thing that protected my dignity. There is a kind of cruelty in that which I do not think she was even clever enough to see. I have spent my working life repairing things people had given up on. Books that came to me in pieces, in shoeboxes, spines gone, signatures loose. You do not fix a book by forcing it. You take it apart properly, you find where the fold failed, and you rebuild it from the fold outward, slowly, in order. I turned the key, and I said out loud, to nobody, "All right then." That was the decision. That was all it was. The next morning I went back in at 10:30, when there is no queue, and I asked for the branch manager, and I said the words the note had told me to say. I would like a copy of everything filed on my account, and I would like the reference number of the review. It took 40 minutes. A woman named Mrs. Okonjo brought me into a side room and put 4 pages in front of me. Form 1140C. Request for fiduciary review. Suspected diminished capacity. My daughter's handwriting. My daughter's signature at the bottom, under a paragraph in small type, which I read 3 times. The paragraph said that the person signing attests, under penalty of perjury, that the statements made are true to the best of their knowledge, and that the signatory holds documented representative authority for the account holder, in the form of a court order, a registered power of attorney, or an equivalent instrument, a copy of which must be attached. Nothing was attached. She had ticked the box, she had signed her name, and she had attached nothing, because there was nothing to attach. I asked Mrs. Okonjo one question. I said, "What happens next in this process?" She said, "The account holder is interviewed, 2 officers, an independent capacity screening, and a review of the account documentation." I said, "When?" Said, "We would normally schedule within 3 weeks." I said, "Would Thursday be too soon?" I made 2 telephone calls that afternoon. The first was to Dr. Aurelio's office, asking for a fresh copy of the October assessment on letterhead, and for a second one, dated this week, if she was willing. She was willing. She said, "Raymond, I am so sorry." I said, "It is not your doing." The second call was to Mr. Pettigrew's old department, which is now called Records Retention, and is one woman named Alice, in an office in Dayton. I asked whether the original signature cards from 1998 were retained. She said, "Cards from that era are microfilmed and held indefinitely." I said, "Would you be able to tell me what is on mine?" There was a long pause and some typing. She said, "Sir, it shows sole signatory, 1 name." I said, "Would you be able to send that to the Delacourt Street branch by Thursday?" She said, "I can send it by end of day." Then I did the last thing, which was the hardest. I drove to the community college, and I waited by the doors until Theo came out, and I told him what was happening, all of it, without decoration. He listened with his hands in his pockets, and he did not look at me. When I finished, he said, "I told her not to. In August. I told her it was wrong." I said, "I know you did." He said, "She said I did not understand the situation." I said, "Theo, I want you to hear me. Whatever happens Thursday, none of it is yours to carry. You said the true thing at the wrong table, and that is a harder thing to do than most people manage in their whole lives." He cried a little, the way boys that age do, furious with themselves for it. I let him. Then I drove home, and I slept better than I had in a month. Thursday, 10 o'clock, the back room at Ridgemont on Delacourt Street. It is a small room, a table, 6 chairs, a window with a blind half down. Mrs. Okonjo was there, and a compliance officer from the regional office named Mr. Halvard, who had driven up that morning and had a folder in front of him. And Diane, she had not expected me to be there. I watched her face when I came through the door, and I want to tell you honestly that it hurt me, because for about half a second before she arranged it, what was on my daughter's face was annoyance. Not fear, not shame. Annoyance, that her father had turned up and made a simple thing complicated. Curtis was not there. Curtis has never in his life been in the room when a thing goes wrong. Mr. Halvard explained the process. He said the purpose of the review was to establish whether the account holder required protective measures, and that it would begin with the independent screening. The screening took 25 minutes. A nurse practitioner came in and took me through it. Orientation, recall, serial 7s. Comprehension of a written instruction. Draw a clock face showing a given time. She said, 3:10. I drew it. My hand did not shake. When she finished, she said to Mr. Halvard, "No indication of impairment. Full orientation, full recall, intact executive function." I put Dr. Aurelio's 2 letters on the table. Diane said, "Dad, this is not what I was trying to..." Mr. Halvard said, "Mrs. Reyes, I would ask you to let me finish." Then he opened his folder, and he took out the second thing. He said, We have retrieved the original account documentation. The account was opened on the 11th of June 1998. The signature card designates a sole signatory. Mr. Holloway, there is no joint holder, no secondary signatory, and no instrument on file granting authority to any other party. He turned a page. He said, Mrs. Reyes, on the form you submitted, you attested that you hold documented representative authority. You ticked the box, confirming an attached instrument. No instrument was attached, and none exists on this account. The room went very quiet. Diane said, I am on his account. I have been on his account for 2 years. Mr. Halvard said, you are an authorized user on a separate checking account for deposits and bill payment. That confers no authority over this account and no standing to make a capacity representation. She said, I did not read all of it. And there it was. My daughter, 44 years old, sitting in a small room with the blind half down, saying the thing that I have heard from 100 people about 100 documents. I did not read all of it. I have spent my life with paper. I will tell you what I have learned. Everything anybody has ever taken from anybody, they took because somebody did not read the page. Mr. Halvard said, the review is closed. There is no finding of diminished capacity. The hold on the account is lifted with immediate effect. Then he said, separately, a false attestation on a 1140C is a matter I am required to refer to our fraud unit. Diane looked at me then, first time in the whole meeting, and she said, one word, Dad. I sat there for a moment. Everybody was waiting. Mrs. Okonjo had her pen up. Mr. Halvard had his hand flat on the folder. I want to tell you what I was thinking about, because it was not her. I was thinking about a boy at a community college with his hands in his pockets, saying I told her not to. I said, Mr. Halvard, is that referral at your discretion? He said, the fraud unit is notified automatically. Whether it proceeds depends in part on whether the account holder considers himself harmed and wishes it pursued. I said, I do not wish it pursued. Diane made a sound. I said, I want 3 things instead, and I want them today. I want the hold lifted, which you have done. I want my daughter removed as authorized user from the checking account. And I want a note on this account that no capacity review may be opened on it again by any party without my written consent. Mr. Halvard said, all 3 can be done. Then I stood up, and I put on my hat, and I said the only thing I said to her directly in that entire room. I said, Diane, it is November. And I walked out. I closed the savings account that afternoon and opened a new one at a different institution, and this time I read every line of the card before I signed it, and I noticed that the stock they use now is thinner than it was in 1998, which tells you something about the world, though I am not sure what. There is one more thing, and it is the part I actually care about. On my way out of the branch that Thursday, I stopped at the counter. The young woman with the bird pin was at window 2. She looked up and she looked frightened, and she had every right to be, because what she had done could have cost her everything. Mr. Halvard was 10 feet behind me putting on his coat. He said, Mr. Holloway, can I ask, what prompted you to request the filing documentation? Most account holders never know a review has been opened. I said, I came in on Tuesday to take out $6,000 for a furnace, and I was told there was a hold. So I asked what the hold was. That is all. He said, that was well judged. I said, I am a bookbinder. We are trained to check the page before we cut it. He nodded and he left, and I have never told anybody, before this, that a woman I did not know wrote 7 words in pencil on the back of a deposit slip and risked her job to give them to me. I still have the slip. It is in the drawer in the hall table, under the tape measure, next to the assessment. 2 weeks later, I went in and opened a small account there for Theo, for college, and I asked specifically for window 2, and when she had finished the paperwork, I said, "Thank you for your help," and she said, "You are very welcome, Mr. Holloway." That is all either of us has ever said about it. That is all that ever needs saying. Diane has not called. Curtis had a letter sent, which I did not answer, and which is in the drawer as well, unopened, because I have found that some doors are better left the way the other person closed them. Theo comes on Sundays. He is learning to sew a text block by hand. He is not good at it yet. His folds are uneven, and he pulls the thread too tight, and last week he said, "Grandad, how did you know she had not attached the thing?" And I said, "I did not know. I only knew that the box was ticked, and a ticked box is a promise. If you make a promise on paper, you had better be able to hand somebody the page behind it. The money is where it was always going to be. It is there so that when the day comes, and it will come, nobody sits around a kitchen table and decides what to do with me." She tried to take that from me by telling a room full of strangers that I could not think. And in the end, the only thing that saved me was that I could. Next time, I will tell you about the man who bought my workshop for $4,000, and what he did not know was inside the second drawer of the bench.